The Argus V drifted silently over the rust-colored plains of Mars, its sleek, angular hull gleaming under the weak sunlight. Inside, the mood was subdued, almost somber, as the crew of 5 continued their monotonous scans of the planet's surface. Weeks had passed since their arrival, and so far there had been little to report. Just endless stretches of barren, rocky terrain, interrupted occasionally by the ghostly remnants of ancient lava flows. The mission had been one of many in recent years, another attempt to survey Mars for resources, anomalies, anything that could offer a glimpse into its past or a hint of future colonization. Commander Elena Reyes sat in the control room, her eyes fixed on the screen, struggling to keep herself awake. She had been through this routine too many times, scanning, analyzing, recording, and repeating. Each day bled into the next, and it was beginning to feel like they would spend an eternity floating above a dead, desolate world. But then the scanner beeped, a short, sharp sound that cut through the silence. Reyes's gaze snapped to the monitor, where a small, flickering blip appeared, a deep, dark spot beneath the surface, almost hidden in the shadows of the Cydonia region. She frowned, her fingers dancing over the controls, adjusting the feed for a clearer view. At first, it looked like a simple cave, just another hollow space carved out by erosion. But as she zoomed in, her stomach twisted. The shape was wrong. It was too geometric, too sharp, as if something had been deliberately placed there, hidden beneath layers of rock and dust. Reyes's heart began to pound as the image slowly resolved, revealing the unmistakable outline of a structure, a massive, angular ship, partially buried and seemingly forgotten. The metal was dark, almost black, with jagged, irregular edges that jutted out like broken shards. She could see no markings, no signs of origin or purpose, only a series of deep, unsettling grooves running across the hull, as though it had been scarred by something enormous. "What the hell?" she whispered, leaning closer, her breath fogging up the screen. For a moment, she considered the possibility of an error, perhaps a glitch in the scanner, a reflection, anything that would make this not real. But the longer she stared, the clearer the image became, and with it, a gnawing sense of dread. Reyes reached for the intercom, her voice tight. "Doctor, Marlowe, get to the control room. Now." Within minutes, the rest of the crew had gathered around the monitor, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the screen. Dr. Marlowe, the mission's lead scientist, was the first to speak. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and apprehension. "That's not natural," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And it's definitely not human." The room fell silent, each of them grappling with the implications. For years, rumors had circulated about strange sightings on Mars, odd signals picked up by satellites, and vague reports of unexplained phenomena. But nothing had ever been confirmed. It had all been chalked up to imagination, to conspiracy theories born from humanity's endless fascination with the unknown. But now, staring at the image before them, it was impossible to deny what they were seeing. "What do you think it is?" asked Lieutenant Carter, the ship's engineer. He was young, fresh out of training, and there was a hint of nervous excitement in his voice. "A ship? An alien base?" Reyes shook her head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." She turned to Dr. Marlowe, her eyes steely. "Can you run a deeper scan? I want to see what's inside." Marlowe hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. "Elena, we should report this." Whatever this is, it's not something we're equipped to handle. Reyes's jaw tightened. She knew he was right, but something about this discovery had ignited a fire within her, a need to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. We will. But first, I want answers. Run the scan. The scanner whirred to life, emitting a low hum as it probed deeper into the cavern, mapping out the structure in greater detail. The feed stuttered, then cleared, revealing a series of interconnected chambers within the ship, each one vast and empty, like the hollow rib cage of some ancient, extinct beast. Reyes could feel her skin prickling, a chill creeping down her spine as more of the ship came into view. It was enormous, far larger than they had initially thought, with passageways that twisted and branched out, vanishing into the dark. Then the scanner hit something solid, a dense mass at the heart of the ship. The screen glitched, lines of static flickering across the display, and for a moment Reyes thought they might lose the feed entirely. But it stabilized, showing a large central chamber, and at its core, a dark, pulsating shape. "What the hell is that?" muttered Carter, his voice barely audible. No one answered. The shape was hard to define, like a shadow that didn't belong. But there was something about it that drew the eye, something that made it impossible to look away. It was as if the darkness was alive, shifting and coiling, almost as though it was waiting for something, waiting for them. Reyes felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to reach out, to touch the screen, as if she could feel the cold alien metal beneath her fingertips. "We need to go down there," she said, breaking the silence. The others looked at her, startled. "Are you serious?" asked Marlowe. "We don't know what this is. We don't even know if it's safe." "I know," Reyes replied, her voice firm. "But we came here to find answers, and now we have one right in front of us. We can't just turn back." Marlowe hesitated, then nodded, though his expression remained grim. "All right, but we proceed with caution. We don't know what we're dealing with." Reyes felt a surge of adrenaline as she turned to the console, her fingers flying across the controls. Within minutes, the ship's engines roared to life, and the Argus Phoeba began its descent, cutting through the thin Martian atmosphere. Outside, the planet stretched out beneath them, a vast red wasteland, cold and unwelcoming. But as they drew closer to the surface, Reyes could see the entrance to the cavern, a dark, jagged gash in the ground, like the mouth of a beast. As the ship touched down, the silence inside the cabin was suffocating, the air heavy with anticipation. Reyes could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "All right, team," she said, her voice steady. "We gear up and head out in 10. Whatever's down there, we're going to find it." She didn't say what she was really thinking, what they were all thinking. That whatever lay hidden beneath Mars' surface, it was something that had been buried for a reason. And now, they were the ones digging it up. As the crew began to prepare, Reyes glanced back at the screen, at the dark, pulsing shape still visible in the scanner's feed. For a brief moment, she thought she saw it move, shifting ever so slightly, as if aware of their presence. She blinked, and it was still again, but the feeling of unease remained, a cold, gnawing fear that seemed to seep into her bones. They were going into the dark, and something was waiting for them there. The Martian wind howled around the Argus Fours, sending swirls of red dust spiraling into the air, as if the planet itself was trying to warn them away. Inside the airlock, the crew stood in silence, adjusting their gear and triple-checking their equipment. The tension was palpable, a heavy weight that seemed to press down on their shoulders. Commander Reyes could see it in their faces, the tight, nervous smiles, the way their hands shook ever so slightly as they secured their helmets. They were scared, and for good reason. She could feel it too, gnawing at the back of her mind, a primal fear that whispered they shouldn't be doing this. But they had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Reyes activated her comms, her voice crackling through the static. "All right, team. We're going in slow and careful. Keep your lights on, stay close, and report anything unusual. Let's move." The airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped out onto the rocky, uneven ground, their boots crunching softly against the dust. Before them, the entrance to the cavern loomed, a dark, jagged maw carved into the Martian surface. It was massive, easily wide enough to swallow their ship whole, and as they approached, the shadows seemed to stretch out towards them, as if reaching to pull them in. Reyes took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm, and led the way down the slope. The cavern walls were sharp and uneven, glistening with a thin layer of moisture that shouldn't have been there. Mars was supposed to be dry, lifeless, but down here it felt damp, almost like the inside of a throat. Their headlamps cut through the dark, casting long, twisted shadows that danced across the walls, but the further they descended, the darker it became, as if the light was being swallowed. "Commander, are you seeing this?" Lieutenant Carter's voice broke the silence, echoing slightly through the cavern. Reyes turned to see him shining his light on the wall, where a series of strange symbols had been etched into the rock. They were jagged, angular shapes, sharp and chaotic, with no discernible pattern. At first, she thought they might be natural formations, cracks in the stone, but as she looked closer, she realized they were too deliberate, too precise. "I see them," she said, her voice hushed. "Doc, any idea what we're looking at?" Dr. Marlowe stepped forward, his gloved fingers brushing lightly over the symbols. "I don't recognize them," he murmured, his breath fogging up the inside of his helmet. "But they're old, very old. They remind me of something I saw in an ancient Sumerian site on Earth. But different. Wrong, somehow." Reyes frowned. "Can you translate any of it?" Marlowe shook his head, but his eyes remained fixed on the symbols, his brow furrowed. "Number, but it's almost as if they're not meant to be read. More like a warning." The words sent a chill through Reyes, and she had to fight the urge to turn back. "We keep moving," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince the crew or herself. "Stay sharp." The cavern twisted and wound downwards, leading them deeper into the planet's crust. As they descended, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the soft, rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, creating the eerie illusion that they were being followed. Reyes kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see something moving just out of the corner of her vision. But there was nothing, only shadows. After what felt like hours, they reached a massive open chamber, and the ship came into view. Even partially buried, it was a sight to behold, a dark, angular behemoth, its sleek surface marred by deep, jagged grooves. The metal was almost black, absorbing the light from their headlamps rather than reflecting it, and Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them, even though it was inanimate. There was something predatory about its shape, the way it loomed over them, half hidden in the dark. "Holy shit," Carter breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "That thing's huge. How did it even get down here?" "More importantly, how long has it been here?" added Dr. Marlowe, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "This isn't just a crash, it's like it was buried." Reyes felt her stomach tighten. "Let's find an entry point. We're not going back without answers." They fanned out, sweeping their lights over the hull, searching for anything that might resemble a hatch or a door. The surface was smooth, almost seamless, but after a few tense minutes, Carter called out, "Over here! I think I found something." The crew gathered around a small circular indentation in the hull, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Carter pressed his hand against it and the metal shifted under his touch, a thin line of light appearing around the edges. With a low hiss, the hatch slid open, revealing a dark passageway leading deeper into the ship. Reyes felt a surge of unease, but she nodded, gesturing for the others to follow. "We're going in. Keep your eyes open." The interior of the ship was even stranger than the outside. The walls were smooth, polished metal, but they were covered in more of the strange symbols, twisting and curling in ways that hurt to look at for too long. The air was thick, almost humid, and it smelled faintly of something rotten, like decay. The passageway was narrow, barely wide enough for them to move single file, and as they made their way deeper, the temperature continued to drop until their breath was visible in the dim light. "This doesn't make any sense," Marlowe muttered, shining his light over the walls. "This isn't the design of a ship. It's more like a maze." Reyes didn't respond. She was focused on the sounds, or rather, the lack of them. There was no hum of engines, no creak of metal, just silence. A silence so deep it felt almost alive, pressing in around them. Then, just as they were about to turn a corner, they heard it. A low, rhythmic thumping, like the slow, steady beat of a drum. "What was that?" whispered Ensign Harper, her voice trembling. Reyes's mouth was dry, her pulse racing. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." The thumping grew louder as they followed the twisting passageways, leading them deeper into the ship's core. The walls began to change, becoming more irregular, almost organic, as if the metal was warping and twisting into something alive. Reyes could see the others shifting uncomfortably, glancing at the walls as if expecting them to move. The air felt heavier, making it harder to breathe, and the smell of decay grew stronger, mingling with something else, something metallic, like blood. Finally, they entered a massive circular chamber, and Reyes's breath caught in her throat. In the center of the room, suspended by thick, dark tendrils, was a large, pulsating cocoon. It was covered in a black, viscous liquid that glistened under their lights, and it seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in time with the rhythmic thumping. Reyes took a step forward, her light fixed on the cocoon, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "What is that?" she said, but no one had an answer. Dr. Marlowe approached the cocoon, his eyes wide, almost hypnotized. "It's organic," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's alive." He reached out as if to touch it, but Reyes grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "We don't know what we're dealing with." But as she spoke, the cocoon began to shudder, the tendrils twitching and tightening. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, faster, as if something inside was waking up. Reyes felt a wave of nausea wash over her, a primal, gut-wrenching fear that screamed at her to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But she couldn't move. None of them could. They were rooted to the spot, transfixed by the cocoon as it began to split, the dark liquid spilling out across the floor. Then, with a sound like tearing flesh, the cocoon ripped open, and a long skeletal hand reached out, fingers too long, too thin, twitching as they grasped at the air. The tendrils snapped one by one, and whatever was inside began to pull itself free, unfolding like a nightmare given form. Reyes's mind screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. She could only watch as the thing emerged, tall and gaunt, its body slick with the same dark liquid, its head featureless and smooth, a void where a face should have been. It stood there for a moment, swaying, almost as if it was testing its limbs, and then it turned towards them, tilting its head as if it was listening, and then it began to move. The thing that emerged from the cocoon was like a nightmare made flesh. It stood at the center of the chamber, hunched and twitching, as if testing the limits of its newfound freedom. It was impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long, bending at unnatural angles. Its skin, or what passed for skin, was a glossy, blackened texture, slick with the dark, viscous fluid that continued to drip from its form, pooling at its feet in a glistening puddle. It had no discernible face, only a smooth, featureless void where a head should have been, but Reyes felt its gaze on them all the same, like a cold hand gripping her heart. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe. The rhythmic thumping that had echoed through the ship was deafening now, vibrating through the walls, pulsing in their chests, as if the whole vessel was alive and beating in sync with the creature. For a moment, everything was frozen, the air thick with dread. Reyes could feel sweat trickling down her back, her pulse hammering in her ears, and yet she couldn't tear her eyes away from it. Dr. Marlowe was the first to break the silence. He took a step forward, his mouth moving, but no sound came out. Reyes didn't realize what he was doing until it was too late. "Marlowe, get back!" she shouted, her voice cracking, but he didn't listen. He was transfixed, his eyes wide with a strange, almost childlike curiosity. "It's ancient," he whispered, barely audible over the thumping. "This is something older than anything we've ever found. It's beautiful." Reyes felt a surge of panic, her mind screaming at her to pull him back, to drag him away from whatever this thing was. But she was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by an unseen force. She watched in horror as Marlowe reached out, his hand trembling as it hovered inches from the creature's dark, glistening skin. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then the thing moved, fast as a striking serpent, its arm snapping out to grab Marlowe's wrist. The room seemed to shrink, the air sucked out of it as the creature tightened its grip. Marlowe gasped, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The thing's head tilted, as if it were studying him, its smooth, featureless face leaning closer. And then, without warning, it pulled him closer, pressing its hand against his chest. Reyes couldn't believe what she was seeing. The black, viscous fluid began to spread from the creature's hand, seeping into Marlowe's suit, slipping beneath the fabric as if it had a mind of its own. Marlowe's screams finally broke through, echoing off the metal walls as the dark liquid crept across his skin, soaking into him, merging with him. His body spasmed, contorting in unnatural ways, his fingers clawing at his own throat, but there was no stopping it. The liquid moved like it was alive, burrowing deeper, consuming him. The others snapped out of their trance, finally reacting. "We have to get him out of there," Carter shouted. But even as he took a step forward, the creature's head snapped around, turning towards them, and they froze again, helpless under its gaze. Reyes felt like she was drowning, her mind struggling to process what was happening. She had seen death before, had even been the one to cause it. But this was different. This wasn't just killing. This was something else, something worse. With a sickening crunch, the creature twisted its arm, and Marlowe went still, his body limp and lifeless, hanging from the creature's grasp. Reyes could barely see him through the dark fluid that coated his face, but she could hear it, faint, wet sounds as the fluid seeped into his ears, his mouth filling him up. And then, impossibly, his eyes snapped open, wide and glassy, staring straight at her. "Marlowe?" she whispered, her voice shaking, but there was no recognition in his gaze, no humanity, just emptiness. The creature let him go, and Marlowe's body crumpled to the floor, lying in a heap, unmoving. For a moment, the only sound was the steady drip of the black fluid pooling around him. Reyes wanted to run, wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She could barely breathe. And then, with a slow, jerky motion, Marlowe began to move. He rose, not like a man standing, but like a puppet being pulled up by invisible strings, his limbs snapping into place. The others stumbled back, gasping in horror as he lifted his head, his mouth hanging open, dark liquid spilling out from between his lips. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, and Reyes realized with a chill that it was coming from him now, pulsing in time with the creature, as if they were one and the same. "No, no, no," Carter muttered, backing away. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But it was real, and it was only getting worse. The creature began to move again, its smooth, faceless head tilting towards the rest of the crew. There was a strange, almost deliberate grace to its movements, as if it was savoring the moment. Reyes could feel the walls closing in, the air thickening, suffocating. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But her legs wouldn't obey. And then the whispers started. They were faint at first, barely more than a murmur, but they grew louder, echoing off the walls, filling the chamber with a chorus of dissonant voices. It was like 1,000 people were speaking at once, overlapping and clashing, a cacophony of sound that made her head throb. She couldn't make out the words, but she could feel them, curling around her mind, prying at the edges of her sanity. "It's in my head," Harper said, clutching at her helmet, her eyes wide with terror. "Make it stop. Please, make it stop." Reyes felt it too, a cold, creeping sensation that wormed its way into her thoughts, turning everything inside out. It was as if the ship, the creature, and the whispers were all part of the same thing, connected by something vast and ancient, something that existed beyond the limits of her understanding. She could feel it probing at her mind, pushing, testing, trying to see how much she could take before she broke. The creature moved closer, and Reyes could see more of the dark fluid dripping from its fingers, pooling at its feet. It reached out again, and she knew, without a doubt, that if it touched her, there would be nothing left of her, just a hollow shell like Marlowe. "We need to get out of here," she said, but her voice was barely more than a whisper, lost in the din of the whispers. She grabbed Carter's arm, pulling him back, forcing him to move. "Now, move!" They stumbled towards the exit, their breaths ragged and panicked, but the walls seemed to close in around them, twisting and warping, blocking their way. The passageway they had come through was gone, replaced by a tangle of dark, wet tendrils that pulsed with a sickening rhythm. It was like the ship was alive, reshaping itself to trap them, to keep them there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and Reyes felt her vision blur, the world tilting and spinning around her. She could see Carter trying to pull Harper up, but she wasn't moving, her eyes wide and blank, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. The black fluid was seeping out from her ears, her nose, trickling down her neck, and Reyes realized with a jolt of horror that it wasn't just the creature. It was the ship. It was everywhere. The thing in the chamber shifted, its faceless head tilting as if it was listening, and then, with slow, deliberate steps, it began to follow them. Reyes could feel the thumping growing louder, faster, almost frantic, and she knew deep down that it wasn't just a sound. It was a heartbeat, the heartbeat of something old and vast, something that had been sleeping for a long, long time, and now it was awake. She grabbed Carter, dragging him back, her mind a haze of terror and confusion. "We have to find another way out," she said, but even as she spoke, she knew it was hopeless. They were trapped, caught in the grip of something they couldn't understand, something that was so much bigger than them. The whispers crescendoed, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else. And for a moment, Reyes thought she could make out a single word, whispered over and over again, a word that sent a spike of cold, paralyzing fear through her. "Consume." And then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the chamber. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No light, no sound, only a suffocating, endless void. Reyes felt her heart stop, a moment of terrifying weightlessness, as if she were suspended in space, untethered and drifting. And then, all at once, the darkness breathed. The rhythmic thumping returned, louder than ever, like a drum pounding against her skull, shaking her to the core. It was everywhere, inside her head, vibrating through her bones, forcing her heartbeat to match its frantic, suffocating pace. She gasped, her hands clawing at her helmet, trying to pull it off, trying to breathe. But the air was thick and heavy, suffused with that sickly, metallic stench. She could feel it in her lungs, in her blood, like a cold, creeping infection. The chamber flickered to life, a dim, pulsating red light illuminating the walls in erratic bursts. The ship was shifting again, its metallic surfaces twisting and stretching like muscle, dark tendrils coiling around the walls, tightening, constricting. It was as if the ship was alive, reshaping itself, preparing for something. Reyes staggered, her legs weak, her mind reeling from the impossible sights around her. The passageways had closed off, sealed by a network of fleshy, organic structures that pulsed in rhythm with the beating, and the air felt thinner, harder to draw in. She turned, searching for the others. "Carter!" she screamed, her voice barely carrying over the throbbing hum. "Harper, where are you?" A flicker of movement caught her eye. She spun around, her light catching a shape in the corner of the chamber. It was Carter, dragging Harper's limp body, his own face slick with sweat, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He stumbled towards her, barely able to keep his footing, and when he looked at her, she could see it. The raw, primal fear in his eyes, a fear that mirrored her own. "Reyes," he gasped, his voice cracking. She's not. She won't wake up. I tried, but..." His voice broke and he dropped to his knees, clutching Harper's shoulders, shaking her, as if trying to force her to come back to life. Please, Harper, wake up, please. Reyes rushed to them, her hands trembling as she knelt beside Harper. The dark fluid was leaking from Harper's mouth, her eyes half open, but there was no recognition, no awareness, just a dull, glassy emptiness. Reyes felt a pang of despair, a hopeless, sinking feeling that threatened to drag her down. She grabbed Carter's hand, squeezing it hard, trying to ground herself, trying to force him to listen. "We need to go," she said, her voice unsteady. "We can't stay here." But Carter wasn't listening. He was crying, his shoulders shaking, his head bowed as he clung to Harper. "She's gone," he whispered, his voice barely audible. They took her, and they're going to take us too." Reyes opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the room shook, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled her teeth. The ship was waking up, and it was angry. She could see the tendrils tightening, the walls constricting, closing in as if the ship was trying to crush them, to consume them. The whispers started again, louder this time, more urgent, a cacophony of dissonant voices that drilled into her skull, drowning out everything else. Consume, consume, consume. Something moved in the shadows, a flash of dark, slick movement, and Reyes's breath caught in her throat. The creature was there, standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching them. She could see its shape, tall and thin, its long skeletal arms hanging at its sides, twitching, waiting. It hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but she could feel its presence, could feel it staring at her, and she knew with a cold, terrible certainty that it was still hungry. "We have to move," she said, her voice raw, desperate. She grabbed Carter by the arm, pulling him up, forcing him to stand. "Come on, we have to get out of here." But as she turned, the walls shifted again, the passageway sealing off, blocking their escape. She could hear the ship creaking, groaning, the metal twisting, the tendrils tightening, and she realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that there was no way out. The ship wasn't just alive, it was a trap, a predator, and they were its prey. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her, filling her head, and she could hear the voices now, clearer than before, each one overlapping, drowning out her thoughts. They weren't just words, they were commands, pushing, urging, forcing her to submit, to let go. She could feel them prying at her mind, peeling away her resistance, and she knew deep down that she couldn't fight it forever. Carter screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the chamber, and Reyes snapped back, her head jerking around to see him writhing, clawing at his own skin. "Get out of my head!" he screamed, his eyes wide, bloodshot, wild. "Get out!" Reyes lunged for him, trying to pull him back, but he shoved her away, his face contorted with fear and rage. "You don't understand," he shouted. "They're in my head. They're in all of us. They're using us." The creature moved then, stepping forward, its long limbs unfurling, its head tilting as if amused. The dark fluid dripped from its fingers, pooling on the floor, and as it moved closer, Reyes could see it more clearly, could see the way the shadows clung to it, twisting and writhing around it, like it was made of the darkness itself. She realized with a cold, creeping dread that it wasn't just a creature. It was a piece of the ship, an extension of its will, a fragment of whatever ancient malevolent thing had built this place. It reached out, its fingers stretching, and Reyes knew in that moment that this was the end. She could feel the ship tightening around them, the walls closing in, the air thinning, suffocating. There was no escape, no hope, only the dark, yawning abyss that waited to swallow them whole. But she refused to go quietly. She reached for her belt, her hands fumbling for the emergency flare, her fingers slick with sweat and blood. If she was going to die, she was going to die fighting, with light in her hands and fire in her heart. She pulled the flare and it sparked to life, a brilliant, blinding light that cut through the darkness, burning bright red. The creature recoiled, its body twitching, the shadows peeling away from it, and for a moment the chamber was filled with light, a stark, painful contrast to the suffocating dark. Reyes could see everything, the tendrils, the walls, the ship's twisted organic structure, pulsing like a living, breathing thing. And she saw Carter standing at the center, his face lit by the flare, his eyes wide, his expression blank. And then, with a sickening realization, she understood. Carter wasn't fighting the ship. He was a part of it now. He smiled, a slow, hollow grin that sent a chill down her spine. "It's too late, Reyes," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "We've already lost. The ship, it doesn't just want to consume us. It wants to be us." The light from the flare flickered, dimming, and Reyes felt the cold creeping back in, the shadows closing around her, tightening, suffocating. She could see the tendrils reaching for her, curling around her legs, pulling her down, and she knew there was no escape. But she wasn't going to give in. Not yet. She raised the flare, the last of its light burning bright, and she hurled it at the creature, watching as it exploded in a shower of sparks, the chamber lighting up one final time. The creature shrieked, a high, piercing wail that tore through the air, and the ship trembled, the walls shaking, the tendrils writhing, as if in agony. Reyes could feel the floor shifting beneath her, cracking, breaking apart, and she realized with a grim sense of satisfaction that she had hurt it. She had hurt it, and she was going to make it remember her. But even as the ship shuddered, even as the chamber began to collapse around them, the whispers continued, soft and insistent, echoing in her head, a final, chilling message that lingered long after the light had faded. "You are not alone. You will never be alone. We are with you. We are you." Reyes felt the ground give way beneath her, and she fell, plunging into the dark, the ship's heartbeat echoing in her ears, slow and steady, relentless. She could still see the creature's shape, still feel its cold, hollow gaze on her, and as the darkness swallowed her, she understood what it had been trying to tell her all along. The ship wasn't just a prison. It was a seed, and it had been waiting for something, someone, to set it free. And now it was awake, and it was hungry, and it would spread like a plague, like a shadow, until there was nothing left but darkness. The last thing she heard as the world dissolved around her was the sound of the ship's heartbeat, slow, steady, eternal. And then there was only silence.